What if Invincible was truly invincible? Part 1. The day the world realized he wasn't enough. The first mistake humanity made was believing they had time. The second, believing Invincible was enough. It began without warning. No speeches, no demands, no dramatic entrance from the Viltrumite Empire. Just impact. 1 second the skies above Earth were calm. The next, they were filled with streaks of red, Viltrumites entering the atmosphere like living missiles. Entire cities vanished before alarms could even finish sounding. Satellites blinked out. Communication died. And then the screaming started. Mark was already in the air when the first city fell. He didn't hesitate. He didn't think. He just moved. Faster than sound. Faster than fear. He caught the first Viltrumite mid-descent and drove them straight into the ground hard enough to split the streets open like shattered glass. He didn't stop to see if they got back up, because he already knew they would. They always did. Within minutes, the sky became a war zone. Heroes rose to meet the invasion, every last one of them. And they fell. Fast. Mark saw people he'd fought beside, people he trusted, get torn apart like they were nothing. Some died mid-air. Some never even saw it coming. The Viltrumites weren't here to fight. They were here to erase. And Mark couldn't be everywhere. That was the worst part. Not the pain. Not the blood. Not even the fear. It was the helplessness. Mark! The voice cut through everything. If Adam Eve was already in the middle of it. Constructs flashing, energy tearing through the sky as she held back 3 Viltrumites at once. She was pushing herself too hard. He could see it. Fall back! Mark shouted, slamming into one of them and sending them flying. I'm not leaving them! She snapped, reinforcing a crumbling building with glowing pink energy. Even now, she was trying to save people. Even now, she believed they could win. Mark wanted to believe that too. He really did. But then he saw him, floating above it all, watching, not fighting, not rushing, just observing like it was already over. Omni-Man, his father. Their eyes met. For a moment the war disappeared. No explosions, no screams, no destruction, just silence between them. You're still trying to save them, Nolan said, his voice calm. Too calm for what was happening below. Their people, Mark snapped, flying up to meet him. This is their home. It was never going to last, Nolan replied. You knew that. Mark's fists clenched. No, you knew that. I chose to fight for it. And look where that's gotten you. Below them, another city collapsed. Mark didn't look. He couldn't. You don't have to do this, Nolan continued. Stand with us. End this quickly. You can still. No. The word hit harder than any punch. For the first time, something flickered in Nolan's expression. Not anger. Not disappointment. Something uncertain. The next few minutes blurred together. Mark fought like he never had before. Every punch carried everything he had left. Every movement pushed his body further past its limits. He wasn't holding back anymore. But it didn't matter. There were too many. Too strong. Too relentless. For every Viltrumite he knocked down, 2 more replaced them. And slowly, inevitably, Mark started to lose. It wasn't one big moment. It was small things. His reactions slowing. His hits landing weaker. His breathing getting heavier. And then, he got hit. Hard. A fist slammed into his side. And something inside him cracked. He felt it sharp, deep, final. He was sent crashing through buildings, skidding across broken ground before finally stopping in a crater of his own making. For a second, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Mark! Eve's voice again. Closer this time. Too close. He forced himself up. Just enough to see her flying toward him, her energy flickering, unstable. And behind her, a Viltrumite. Fast. Too fast. Mark tried to move. His body didn't respond. He tried to shout. Nothing came out. Time slowed. He saw it all. Eve reaching for him. The Viltrumite closing the distance. The moment that was about to happen. No! Mark whispered, barely audible. The impact was quiet, too quiet. No explosion, no dramatic blast. Just a hand, straight through her. Everything stopped. The war. The noise. The world. Eve looked at him, not in fear, not in pain, but in apology, like she was sorry she couldn't stay. Her hand twitched, reaching toward him one last time. And then, she was gone. Mark didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't move, because something inside him had just broken in a way that couldn't be fixed. Not grief, not rage, something deeper, something ancient. The Viltrumite pulled their hand free, letting Eve's body fall like it meant nothing. Pathetic, they muttered. That's when it happened. Mark's heart stopped for a fraction of a second. And in that moment, something changed. His body didn't shut down. It adapted. Instantly, violently, completely. His cells began to rewrite themselves. His bones hardened beyond anything Viltrumite biology should allow. His muscles compressed, strengthened, perfected. Every weakness removed, every limit destroyed. Mark stood up, slowly, silently. The Viltrumite turned back toward him. You're still Ollie. They didn't finish that sentence, because Mark was suddenly right in front of them. No speed build-up, no warning, just movement beyond perception. Mark didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't hesitate. He hit them once, and they exploded. Not knocked back, not injured, gone. Reduced to nothing by a single effortless strike. For the first time since the invasion began, everything went quiet. Even the Viltrumites stopped. High above, Omni-Man stared down at his son. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Nolan felt something he hadn't felt in centuries. Fear. Mark looked up. His eyes weren't filled with rage, or sadness, or even humanity. They were empty, cold, evolving. And as he hovered there, surrounded by the silence of a war that had suddenly lost control, only one thought remained. If strength is all that matters, then I'll become something no one can ever stop. Part 2. The moment the war changed. Silence. That was the first thing anyone noticed. Not the destruction, not the bodies, not even the fact that a Viltrumite, one of the strongest beings in the universe, had just been erased in a single hit. Just silence. Every Viltrumite in the sky stopped moving. They didn't retreat. They didn't attack. They watched, because something had just happened that didn't make sense. At the center of it all was Invincible, floating, still, unmoving. The air around him wasn't normal anymore. It shimmered, distorted, like reality itself didn't fully understand what he had become. High above, Omni-Man slowly descended. His eyes locked onto his son. Mark! For once, there was hesitation in his voice. You need to stop. Mark didn't respond. Not with words. Not with emotion. A Viltrumite, one of the older ones, scarred, experienced, broke formation. This is nothing but a mutation, he growled. Kill him, he charged. Faster than most beings could perceive. Fast enough to tear through mountains just by moving. Mark didn't move. The Viltrumite's fist connected with his face. Nothing happened. No recoil. No reaction. No damage. For the first time in that warrior's long, violent life, they felt uncertainty. Mark turned his head slowly. Not from impact, just curiosity. Then he grabbed the Viltrumite's arm. And in that instant, he understood everything. The strength, the speed, the limits. And then he went beyond them. The Viltrumite tried to pull away. They couldn't. Mark's grip tightened, not with effort, but with something far worse. Ease. You're weak, Mark said quietly. And then, he crushed the arm. The scream that followed didn't last long. Because Mark didn't stop there. He didn't punch. Didn't throw them. Didn't even look angry. He simply ended them. Gone. Again. Now there was no silence. Now there was fear. The Viltrumites attacked all at once. Dozens. Then hundreds. The sky turned into a storm of red and white as they rushed him from every direction. Their combined force enough to shatter continents. This was what they were. Conquerors. Warriors. Perfection. And they were about to find out they weren't enough. Mark moved, and everything changed. He didn't fly. He didn't dash. He didn't accelerate. He simply was where he needed to be. 1 second he was surrounded. The next, half of them were gone. No explosions. No dramatic impacts. Just absence. Every movement he made was perfect. Every strike instant. Every action final. He wasn't fighting anymore. He was correcting. A Viltrumite swung at him from behind. Mark caught the fist without turning. Another rushed from above. Gone before they could touch him. 2 more tried to flank. They didn't even reach him. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't even a massacre. It was inevitability. High above, Omni-Man watched it unfold. And for the first time since he had come to Earth, he understood something horrifying. This isn't evolution, Nolan whispered. This was something else. Something beyond Viltrumite. Something unstoppable. Fall back! One of the commanders shouted. But it was already too late, because Mark had stopped reacting and started deciding. He raised his hand slightly. The air compressed. The sky warped. And in a single moment, everything within miles of him collapsed inward. Viltrumites, debris, sound, crushed into nothing. The battlefield was cleared. Not defeated. Not driven back. Erased. Only a handful remained. They didn't speak. Didn't move. Didn't attack. They just floated there. Because for the first time in their existence, they had no idea what to do. Mark looked at them. Not with anger. Not with hatred. But with something far colder. Judgment. If strength is what defines you, his voice carried across the sky without effort, then you were never strong. No one moved. No one dared. And then, slowly, one of them lowered their head. Then another. Then all of them. Not out of respect. Not out of loyalty. But because something deep in their instincts, something older than their empire, recognized the truth. They were no longer the strongest. And that meant only one thing. They had already lost. Mark turned away from them, back toward Earth, back toward what remained. But as he looked down at the broken world below, there was no relief, no satisfaction, because even with all this power, he was too late, and somewhere deep inside him, that realization was still human. For now. End of Part 2. Part 3. The King of Nothing. The surviving Viltrumites didn't run. They didn't need to, because there was only one person left who could decide what happened next. Far beyond Earth, beyond its orbit, beyond even the battlefield Mark had just erased, he was already watching. Thrag, the strongest Viltrumite to ever live. The one who built the Empire into what it was. The one even Omni-Man followed. And for the first time in centuries, he felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, but anticipation. This is what we were meant to become, Thrag said quietly. Then he moved. He didn't fly like the others. Didn't tear through the atmosphere with reckless force. He arrived. One moment he was in deep space. The next, he was standing in front of Mark. No shockwave. No warning. Just presence. The remaining Viltrumites immediately pulled back. Not because they were told to, but because instinct demanded it. This wasn't their fight anymore. Mark looked at him, and for the first time since his transformation, something registered. Not emotion, not fear, recognition. You're different, Thrag said, studying him. More than them. Mark didn't respond. You've surpassed us already, Thrag continued. But you don't understand what that means. Silence. It means you belong at the top. A pause. As our king. That word lingered in the air. King. For a moment, the old Mark, the one who cared, who fought, who believed, flickered beneath the surface. Then it disappeared. I'm not like you, Mark said. Thrag smiled. Not mockingly, not arrogantly, but knowingly. You already are. And then, they clashed. No build-up. No countdown. Just impact. The force of their collision didn't shake the earth. It shifted space. The clouds below split instantly. The ocean beneath them pulled upward as if gravity itself had been reversed. Satellites were ripped apart without even being touched. Thrag struck first. Perfect blow. One that had ended wars. Mark took it, and didn't move. Thrag's eyes narrowed. Then Mark hit back. For the first time in his life, Thrag was pushed. Not far. Not dramatically. But enough. And that was all it took. The fight escalated instantly. Blows faster than light. Movements beyond perception. Each impact tearing reality apart piece by piece. They didn't stay near Earth. They couldn't. The moment their speed increased, they vanished from the planet entirely, launching into deep space in a violent blur of motion. Planets cracked as they collided with them. Asteroid belts were erased just from the shockwaves. Stars themselves seemed to flicker under the pressure of their battle. Thrag adapted. That's what made him king. Every second he adjusted, improved, perfected. But Mark was doing something else. He wasn't adapting. He was surpassing. Every hit Thrag landed made Mark stronger. Every technique he used became useless moments later. Every advantage he gained disappeared instantly. "You're learning too fast," Thrag said, blocking a strike that would have destroyed a planet behind him. Mark didn't answer, because he already understood, and he had already moved past it. Thrag attacked again. Faster, harder, smarter. Mark countered before the attack even fully existed. That's when it happened. For the first time, Thrag was outmatched. Not gradually, not over time. Instantly, Mark grabbed him mid-attack, stopped him, completely. Thrag struggled, pushed, fought. Nothing. Mark's grip didn't tighten, didn't strain, simply held. "You built everything on strength," Mark said quietly. Thrag's eyes locked onto his, still defiant, still unbroken. "Yes." Mark tilted his head slightly, almost curious. "And this is the strongest you can be?" For the first time, Thrag didn't answer immediately. That hesitation, that fraction of a second, that was the moment the Empire truly ended. Mark raised his other hand. Energy didn't gather. Power didn't build. Because it didn't need to. Everything he was already enough. "I've already gone beyond you." And then, he closed his hand. There was no explosion. No dramatic flash. Just silence. And when it ended, Thrag was gone. Not defeated. Not broken. Erased. Across the stars, every Viltrumite felt it. Not through communication. Not through sight. But through something deeper. Their king was gone. And in his place, something greater had taken his throne. Mark floated alone in the emptiness of space. No enemies. No challengers. No equals. The strongest being in existence. And for the first time since it all began, there was nothing left to fight. End of Part 3. Part 4. The Emperor rises. There was no announcement. No signal. No message sent across the stars. And yet, every Viltrumite knew. The moment Thrag ceased to exist, something deeper than command shifted. For thousands of years, the Viltrumite Empire had followed one rule above all else. The strongest rules. And now, there was no debate, no challenge, no rival claim. Only one truth remained. Invincible was the strongest. Across galaxies, fleets stopped mid-flight. Armies halted their invasions. Worlds that were seconds from destruction were suddenly left untouched, because the Empire wasn't waiting for orders. It was waiting for him. Mark returned to Earth, not with speed, not with urgency, but with presence. The sky didn't shake when he arrived. The air didn't ripple. It simply accepted him. Below, what remained of humanity watched. Burned cities, broken landscapes, a world that had already lost. And above it all, he hovered, the same place he had been when everything changed. For a long moment, he said nothing, did nothing. Then, the sky filled again. But this time, they weren't attacking. Thousands of Viltrumites descended. Slowly, silently, they didn't form ranks, didn't prepare for battle. They stopped midair and waited. Even Omni-Man stood among them, not as a conqueror, not as a general, but as one of many. Mark looked at them, all of them, the warriors who had destroyed worlds without hesitation, the beings who had once stood above everything. Now, they stood beneath him, waiting. A single Viltrumite stepped forward, older, battle-worn. "We await your command." The words echoed across the broken earth. Mark didn't answer immediately, because something inside him hesitated. Not from weakness, not from doubt, but from memory. He remembered who he used to be, the hero, the son, the one who believed strength was meant to protect, not dominate. And for a brief moment, that version of him tried to speak. "Leave this planet," he almost said. "End this. Go." But the words never came, because something else spoke louder, something colder, stronger, more Viltrumite. "If I don't lead them," the thought formed slowly, "someone else will, and that someone wouldn't hesitate." Mark lowered himself slightly, not bowing, not descending, just enough to show one thing: decision. "You don't conquer Earth," he said. The Viltrumites didn't react, didn't question. They listened. "You don't destroy it." A pause. "You leave it untouched." For the first time, there was movement, not rebellion, not resistance, relief. Even Omni-Man looked surprised. Mark's gaze hardened. But the rest of the universe? The air changed. "You follow me." That was it. No speech, no declaration, no grand vision, just truth. And that was enough, because the moment he said it, they knelt, all of them, thousands of Viltrumites, dropping in unison, not forced, not commanded, instinct, recognition, submission. Even Nolan. For the first time since Mark had known him, his father lowered his head, not as a lesson, not as manipulation, but as acceptance. "You've surpassed me," Nolan said quietly. Mark didn't respond, because that wasn't the point anymore. He looked beyond them, beyond Earth, beyond everything he had ever known. And in that moment, the truth settled completely. He wasn't a hero anymore. He wasn't just a Viltrumite. He wasn't even human. He was something else entirely. Something the universe had never seen before. Something that couldn't be challenged. Something that couldn't be stopped. Something that ruled, because nothing else could. Far beyond Earth, the Empire began to move again. But this time, it wasn't chaos. It was order, controlled, directed, led. And at the center of it all, floating in absolute silence, was the being they now followed without question. Not a king, not a conqueror, but something greater, an emperor. End of Part 4. Part 5. The Empress of War. The universe had gone quiet. Not peaceful, not safe, just controlled. Under the rule of Invincible, the Viltrumite Empire no longer rampaged blindly across galaxies. Worlds weren't destroyed for sport. Civilizations weren't crushed without purpose. Everything had changed, but one thing hadn't. Viltrumites still believed in strength. And deep down, so did Mark. He just redefined it. Some Viltrumites thrived under this new order. Others obeyed out of necessity. And a few, they watched him. One of them stood above the rest. Anissa. She had always believed in Viltrumite supremacy, in dominance, in taking what you wanted because you were strong enough to do it. And yet, she didn't challenge Mark, because she had seen what happened to those who tried. Instead, she observed. At first, it was simple curiosity. She watched how he ruled, how he didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to enforce obedience, didn't even need to prove himself anymore. Because everyone already knew. He was untouchable, and that fascinated her. "You've changed them," she said one day, appearing beside him in orbit above a distant world. Mark didn't look at her. "They changed because they had to." Anissa crossed her arms. studying him. No, they changed because of you. Silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Below them, a planet continued its existence. Untouched, unharmed, spared simply because Mark allowed it. You could have destroyed everything, Anissa said. I still can, Mark replied calmly. That wasn't arrogance. That was fact. Anissa smiled slightly. That's what makes you different. Mark finally looked at her. And what makes you stay? That question lingered longer than expected. Because Anissa didn't answer right away. She could have said power, could have said loyalty, could have said survival. But none of those were true. I wanted to see what happens next. Time passed. Not days. Not weeks. Years. And something unexpected happened. Anissa stayed. Not as a follower. Not as a rival. But as something else. She stood beside him in decisions. Challenged him when others wouldn't. Understood him in ways no one else could. Because unlike the others, she wasn't afraid of him. And Mark, for the first time since everything changed, he wasn't alone. The shift, it didn't happen suddenly. There was no single moment, just small things. Conversations that lasted longer than they should. Silences that didn't feel empty. Moments where neither of them needed to speak. Anissa began to see something she hadn't expected. Not weakness, but control. Not hesitation, but restraint. Mark wasn't holding back because he couldn't destroy everything. He was holding back because he chose not to. And to a Viltrumite, that was something far more powerful than domination. You could rule them with fear, she said once. I already do, Mark replied. Anissa shook her head. No, this is different. Mark didn't ask how, because deep down, he understood. The first crack in the Emperor. It happened in silence. They stood together at the edge of a dying star, watching it collapse inward, a force powerful enough to destroy entire systems. And yet, to Mark it was nothing. I remember when things like this felt big, he said. Anissa glanced at him. And now it's just there. For the first time, there was something in his voice. Not weakness, but distance. From everything. Anissa stepped closer. You're not like them anymore, she said. I was never like them. No, she replied quietly. You're becoming something else. What they became. The Empire noticed. Not through announcements. Not through declarations. But through presence. Anissa was always there. At his side. Not beneath him. Not behind him. Beside him. And slowly, the understanding spread. This wasn't just their emperor. This was something more. A balance. Power. And something else. Something Viltrumites didn't fully understand. But respected. The beginning of a legacy. You could rebuild our people, Anissa said one day. Mark didn't respond immediately. You could make something stronger than what we were. He looked at her. And how would we do that? Anissa didn't hesitate. With us. That moment changed everything. Not because of power. Not because of strategy. But because for the first time, Mark didn't see the Empire. He saw a future. And for the first time since Eve, he didn't turn away from it. The Emperor and his Empress. They didn't announce it. Didn't need to. The Empire felt it. Understood it. Accepted it. Two beings at the top. Not competing. Not clashing. But united. And from that union, something new began. Not just an empire. Not just power. But a bloodline. One that wouldn't just inherit strength, but redefine it. Far across the stars. The Viltrumite Empire stood stronger than ever before. Not because it conquered, but because it was led by something beyond conquest. And at the center of it all, floating above everything they ruled, were the two beings no one could challenge. No one could reach. No one could ever surpass. The Emperor and his Empress. End of Part 5. What if Invincible was truly invincible? 7. Part 6. The Bloodline of Gods. The Empire didn't just change. It evolved. Under the rule of Invincible and Anissa, the Viltrumite Empire became something it had never been before. Not just powerful, perfected. Worlds weren't destroyed anymore. They were chosen, tested, strengthened. The weak weren't erased blindly. They were refined. And at the center of it all was something far more important than conquest. The future, the first child. When it happened, the entire empire felt it. Not through announcement, not through celebration, but instinct. The child of Mark and Anissa wasn't just another Viltrumite. It was something new, something greater. When their first child was born, there were no cries of weakness, no fragile beginning. The room itself trembled. Energy pulsed outward, not uncontrolled, not chaotic, but aware. Mark stood there holding the child, silent, still. And for the first time since he became what he was, something changed in his eyes. Not power, something softer, something human. Anissa watched him carefully. "You feel it too," she said. Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to, because he understood. This wasn't just his child. This was evolution beyond even him. A new generation. Years passed. More children followed. Each one stronger than the last. Faster, smarter, more aware. They didn't struggle to grow. They didn't need to learn strength. They were born with it, naturally, effortlessly, and the Empire watched, because even the most powerful Viltrumites began to realize something terrifying. These children were surpassing them before they even reached maturity, training the unstoppable. Mark didn't raise them like Viltrumites. He didn't throw them into war, didn't force them to fight for survival. He taught them control, precision, understanding. Strength without control is nothing, he told them. And when they sparred with him, it wasn't to dominate, it was to refine them. But even then, something became clear. They were learning too fast, adapting too quickly. Just like he did, only better. The fear of the Empire. Whispers spread. Quiet, careful, but real. What happens when they surpass him? No one dared say it openly, but everyone thought it, because the Viltrumite rule had never changed. The strongest rules. And these children, they weren't just strong. They were inevitable. The test. One day, one of them challenged him, not out of rebellion, not out of hatred, but instinct. A son, young, but already stronger than most full-grown Viltrumites. "Fight me," he said. Anissa watched carefully. The Empire held its breath, because this moment would decide everything. Mark didn't refuse. He stepped forward. "Then learn," he said, and they fought. The impact alone shook entire systems. The speed of their movements shattered space around them. For the first time in years, Mark was pushed, not defeated, but tested, and something inside him responded. He grew stronger, again, just like before. The fight ended quickly. Not because Mark crushed him, but because he stopped. "Not yet," Mark said. The boy stood there, breathing, learning, understanding, and then he nodded. The truth of the bloodline. Later, Anissa stood beside Mark. "You felt it," she said. Mark didn't deny it. "They're getting close." No fear in his voice, no concern, just truth. Anissa smiled slightly. "That's what you wanted." A pause. Then Mark looked out across the Empire, across the stars, across everything he ruled. "No," he said quietly. "That's what we needed. Something beyond an empire." The Viltrumites had once believed they were the peak of existence. Now, they were witnessing something greater. Not just a ruler, not just a bloodline, but a transformation of their entire species. And at the center of it all was the family that would define the future. Not through fear, not through conquest, but through something far more powerful. Evolution without limits. Mark stood with Anissa, their children beside them, looking out at an empire that no longer resembled what it once was. And for the first time, it wasn't about ruling. It was about what came next. Because even now, even after everything, Mark Grayson was still becoming something more. End of Part 6. Part 7. When gods challenge gods. The universe had known peace. Not the fragile kind. Not the temporary kind. But the kind forced into existence by something no one could oppose. For centuries, the Viltrumite Empire thrived under the rule of Invincible and Anissa. Worlds grew stronger. Civilizations advanced. War became rare, because no one dared start one. But power like that, it doesn't stay still forever. It grows, and eventually turns inward. The one who stepped forward. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't hatred. It was inevitability. Mark's eldest son stood at the edge of space, staring out into the endless void. He had grown faster than any Viltrumite in history, stronger than generals, faster than legends, and unlike the others, he didn't fear his father. He understood him, which made this moment unavoidable. "You've been holding back," he said. Mark stood across from him, silent. "You're still growing," his son continued. Even now, that was true. Mark hadn't stopped evolving. Not since the day everything changed. "And one day," the son said, stepping forward, "you won't be able to control it." Anissa watched from a distance. She didn't interfere, because she knew what this was. Not a challenge. A transition. The first true threat. "Fight me." The words echoed through space. Not as a demand, as a certainty. Mark looked at him. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. This wasn't a Viltrumite opponent. Not a conqueror. Not an enemy. This was his legacy. And for the first time, Mark felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, but uncertainty. The clash. They moved at the same time. And the universe broke. Not metaphorically. Actually, space twisted around them as their first impact sent shockwaves tearing through entire systems. Stars dimmed. Planets shifted from their orbits. This wasn't a fight. This was two forces rewriting reality itself. Mark struck first. His son blocked it. Adapted. Instantly. "You taught me control," his son said, countering with a strike that forced Mark back. "And you taught me strength." Another clash. This time, Mark felt it. Not pain, but resistance. Real resistance. Evolution versus evolution. Every second they changed. Every movement became faster. Every strike became stronger. Mark adapted, but so did his son. That was the difference. For the first time, Mark wasn't the only one evolving. "You see it now, don't you?" his son said, circling him. Mark didn't answer, because he did. This wasn't just a fight. This was the next step. The moment everything balanced. They collided again, and this time, neither of them moved. Fist against fist. Equal. Perfectly equal. The shockwave didn't explode outward. It froze. Like reality itself couldn't decide which one of them was stronger. Anissa's eyes narrowed. This is it. The decision. Mark looked at his son. Really looked at him. Not as a rival. Not as a threat. But as what he had become. Stronger. Faster. The future. And in that moment, Mark understood something he never had before. Strength wasn't about staying at the top forever. It was about what came after. Mark lowered his fist. The universe stilled. His son didn't attack. Didn't press forward. He waited. "You've reached it," Mark said. A pause. "Beyond me." The words echoed. Not just in space, but across the empire. For the first time in its history, the strongest had stepped down. A new emperor. The son didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. He simply nodded. Because he understood what that meant. Behind them, the stars seemed to settle. The tension disappeared. The imbalance corrected. Anissa approached slowly, looking between them, not surprised, just accepting. The empire felt it instantly. The shift, the change, the new center of power. And just like before, they knelt, not to Mark, but to what came after him. What Mark became. Mark didn't fall, didn't disappear. He remained, but not as emperor, not as ruler, something else, something beyond titles, presence, a force, the one who started it all. And as he stood there, watching his son take his place, for the first time since he became invincible, Mark smiled, not from power, not from victory, but from something far greater. He was no longer alone at the top. End of Part 7. Part 8. The one above all. The universe didn't collapse. It didn't fall into chaos. It didn't burn. It continued, because the transition had been perfect. The Viltrumite Empire didn't weaken when Invincible stepped down. It evolved. Stronger leadership, sharper control, a new generation built for a new era. His son ruled exactly as he was meant to, not with hesitation, not with cruelty, but with balance. And at his side, Anissa remained, not as Empress of Conquest, but as something greater, constant, a guide, a reminder of what they had built together. But Mark didn't stay. First, he remained close, watching, observing, ensuring everything held together. But slowly, something began to change. Not in the Empire, in him, the final evolution. Mark had spent centuries evolving, adapting, surpassing everything placed in front of him. Enemies, limits, even his own kind. But now, there was nothing left. No battles, no rivals, no ceilings to break. And yet, he was still changing. Started small. His presence began to feel different. Not stronger, but bigger. Like he wasn't just in space anymore. Like space was inside him. He began to move less. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't need to. Distance stopped meaning anything. Time slowed around him. He could feel everything. Every star burning. Every world turning. Every life rising and ending. All at once. The realization. You're leaving. Anissa's voice broke the silence. Mark stood at the edge of a galaxy, not looking at anything specific. Just everything. I'm not sure I can stay, he said. That was the truth. Not a choice. A consequence. You've gone too far, she said quietly. Mark didn't deny it. I can feel it, he continued. Everything, all at once. A pause. And it's getting stronger. For the first time in centuries, Anissa looked at him with something close to concern. Will you come back? That question lingered, because for once, Mark didn't have an answer. The last goodbye. He didn't gather the Empire, didn't make a speech. That wasn't who he was anymore. Instead, he stood with the only ones who mattered. Anissa, his children, his legacy. You've already surpassed me, he said to his son. The new emperor didn't respond. He didn't need to. Mark looked at each of them, not as a ruler, not as a god, but as something he hadn't been in a long time. A father. You don't need me anymore. Anissa stepped closer. You were never something we needed, she said. A pause. You were something we chose. That stayed with him. Beyond everything. Mark turned away. Not slowly. Not dramatically. Just naturally. And then, he disappeared. Not flying. Not teleporting. Gone. What he became. No one saw where he went. Because where he went wasn't a place. He became something else. Something beyond Viltrumite. Beyond strength. Beyond evolution. He became everywhere. The universe didn't feel ruled anymore. Felt watched. Not controlled. Balanced. Stars that should have died didn't. Worlds that should have fallen survived. Events that should have spiraled into chaos corrected themselves. Not by force, but by presence. And deep within the fabric of everything, there was something silent, something endless, something invincible. The legacy lives on. Back within the Empire, life continued, stronger than ever, led by a ruler who had earned his place, guided by those who remembered what came before. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between stars, they could feel it, not as a voice, not as a command, but as something greater, watching, protecting, existing, not as a king, not as an emperor, but as something far beyond titles, a force that could never be stopped. The end? Or is it I?
Nothing can break me.